This episode sponsored by Lake Monster Details, producing the Don's Light and Magic Legacy line of parts, offering upgrade parts and decals for accuracy, special effects, and lighting. Visit www.lakemonsterdetails.com and make it glow. Also sponsored by GCals, producing aftermarket replacement decals and custom quality graphics for your favorite spaceships. Visit www.gcals.company.site and add some personalization to your sci-fi models today. Also sponsored by Mask Design, boldly going where no masking kit has gone before. Take your model to the next level of detail and accuracy with a masking kit from Mask Design. Visit Mask Design on Facebook or click the ordering link in the notes below the video. Hey, what's up, fellow modelers? Will here. Welcome to the Engines Chair. This episode, we are going to get into lighting and running our wires into the model and working on the effects board. I did get everything in that I needed, so I couldn't find the effects board that I had, so I had to order a new one that came in. So I do have that ready to go. And we're going to take a look at all that. I did have a minor setback. I say minor because if it had happened later, it would have been a bigger issue than if it happened now, and you'll understand what I'm talking about once we get into that. On another note, I did get my jacket, my bomber jacket in from New American Jackets. I love it. It's a nice jacket. If you want more information on it, go over to the video that I did on that, and I'll give you more information on that. But I don't say go climb a rock. I do say go build a model. So without any further ado, give me a minute. I'll put you on the bench. We'll get to work. All right, guys, so we're starting this by taking one step back. It's just been the theme here this week, the past 2 weeks actually, for me to take one step forward and one step back. I say one step back because it actually hasn't been that big of a deal. My refit, I've actually taken a step back too, but for different reasons than the Grissom build. So I've been working on getting this wired up. And when I was working on this bottom part, I noticed I had a little bit of a paint chip missing. And I wasn't quite sure what was going on there. So I picked that a little bit, and the paint just started to kind of flake off. So I decided what I was going to do is I took a piece of blue tape, blue painter's tape, and I stuck it on there. And I pulled it off, and there's nothing coming off now, but you can see a big piece came off. And let's see if we still got some coming off up here. And come to find out, when I started doing this all along, the model here where I painted, I just had paint pieces peeling right off, and it's going all the way down to the bare plastic. So I've either now I did wash these pieces before I started this build, so I'm not sure what happened, whether the wash I did didn't get everything off, or whether while I was sanding some stuff I didn't get the dust off. I mean, I don't think that's it, because it's a lot, and I wiped these off before I painted them, so I don't think that's it. I'm thinking maybe the primer I used isn't such a great primer to use. I used it because it was a kind of a high build primer, so it kind of helps to with the seam line, especially this one here. And you can see I've gone through sanding that, because the more I looked at this, the less I liked this seam. It just seemed to stick out more than me the more I looked at it, even though it looked like it was good at one point. So I've gone back and started working on that again, and working on that, and then I realized when I started trying to kind of test fit some of these pieces that they weren't fitting very well. And this back piece here, I actually had to take my hobby knife and trim down. There's a raised area around this this opening for that. I think this is a strobe light back here, and it wouldn't fit. It just would not go down in here, so I had to trim it some to get that piece to finally fit. And before I did all the trimming to it, I actually popped this seam back open. So what I've decided to do is I am going to get this wired up and get my board installed and get this sealed up. And then I'm just going to do, because there's going to be a seam here anyway. You're going to have a seam around this whole part here. Not a bad seam, but it's going to need some work to really hide it. So what I've decided to do is I'm just going to go ahead and get this wired up and get it sealed up with my my effects card in the belly here. And the way I figure, you got two options. Is you can either do the effects card in the belly. Well, you got three. Some people put it in the base. I don't do that a lot. Sometimes I do, but I just go ahead and put it in the model. But if you're going to put it in the model, you can either put it in the belly, or you can put it in this big flat section. But the problem with that is, let me show you this kit. The wiring kit came in from Tenna Controls because I couldn't find the one that I had. It's still around here somewhere, but I'm sure I'll find a use for that at some point. But you see how these wires stick up. I'm a little concerned about that fitting in here and being able to close that top. And it may or may not work, but I'd rather not take the chance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this and I'm going to stick it in the belly here where I know there's plenty of room. And then I'll just run the wires I need for my strobes and my navs and my warp engines. Well, actually the warp engines aren't going to run to this board, but I've got to run the wire up to that before I seal this up. And that means I've got to get this also mounted on a pole. And I've got this clear brass tubing, which is what I'm going to use for a mount. And I've got to make this hole a little bit bigger to fit this brass tube in here. Then I've got to epoxy this in place and wait for that to set up. So I've got a couple things to get done here. Now I did start working on the lighting on this, and what I've got in here so far, at least in the belly part, I haven't done the strobes in here yet. I've actually got a strobe right here that I just soldered up this SMD to be the strobe. But I need to put a strobe here, and then I believe a strobe goes here on the back end, and maybe up the front here too. I got to look at that. I'm guessing that's why the hole's there, is for another strobe. It's a lot of strobes on this little ship. So I've got to wire those in yet, but I've been putting in my navs, and the way I've been doing these navs is I've been taking the well, I could show you a little bit on here. I'll show you on this one since I just did this one. But so on my strobes, what I've been doing is taking the diode there, the actual part that emits the light, and I've been sticking it over the hole. And oh, let me get this. Let's see. I don't know what I did with my my little pointer tip, but basically what I've been doing is taking this wire, or this SMD, and placing it right over the hole. Now for the colored ones, the nav lights, I actually haven't been putting the diode directly over the hole, and that's because I don't want a pinpoint light, bright light where these navs are, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a minute. For the strobes, on the other hand, I'm sticking those directly over the hole with the diode facing out the hole. Let's see if I can get this in place here, since I don't have. And then what I do is I take, hopefully I can do this because I don't have my, so I take some of my clear resin, my UV resin, and put it over the diode, and then use my UV light to kind of lock that in place there with the diode facing out. And by doing this, I will say the one thing you got to be careful with doing this though is that it actually finishes setting up, because you see that just pulls right out, which leads me to what I was getting ready to say. If you use this UV resin, do not, I've seen some people talk about using this as a glue. This does not make a very good glue. So it doesn't really hold very well. But what you can do is, if you get it in there and get it locked down with this, what you can do is come back in with your CA glue and lock it in place so it won't move. Because what I had happen actually on this this dome part where that strobe is, I actually had the strobe pull out because there wasn't the UV resin itself just doesn't make a great glue to hold stuff in place. Now I've seen some advertisements that listed UV glue, and I don't know if that's a different brand or a different makeup, but UV resin is definitely not a good glue. So what I do is, and what I just did was, I put a little CA glue on top of there after I get that UV set up, that UV resin set up, and then I hit it with the kicker and lock it in place. I'm just going to hold this UV light on here a little bit longer to make sure that all gets set in. But by setting the SMD for the strobes directly over the hole, you do get a brighter light there, and that's fine for the strobes. But for the navs, I didn't want a pinpoint light showing every time it lights up. And let me connect this up, and I'll show you what I mean. I got kind of a mess of wires going here. I need to tidy up a bit. Let's see if I can hold this and show this to you. I may have to turn the lights out for this. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, so I don't know how well that's showing up in the camera. I may have to, let me focus a little bit, bear with me. And my mouse for some reason on my computer stopped working. Alright, so you've got the light there. But you see how you don't really have, if I can get this to stay lit, a really bright pinpoint of light there. And that's because the SMD is actually sitting off to the side and it's clear resin in that hole. So that way it's illuminating that hole instead of getting a bright pinpoint of light, which you will get with this. Bear with me, folks. Bear with me. Which we're going to get with this, more than likely. Alright. It may not be showing up as a bright pinpoint on there. But it does make it a little bit less, to me it's more in scale that way. Let me just put it that way. As a matter of fact, the best way to do this, I've got this dome set up to a plug, so let me just plug this in. But let me wrap this hot wire back up since my piece of electrical tape decided to fall off, because I don't want them grounding out and I don't want to get shocked. Alright, so you can see how bright that nav light or the strobe light is right there versus the navs on this side aren't quite as bright. You can see, yeah, that one gets a little bit bright. That's probably pretty close to the hole. So if you turn that at an angle, you can get a little bit bright. But I've still got to put another drop of resin there once I get this set up. So that's what I've gotten done on this so far. You can see how nice and even that lights up. And you only get a hot spot if I turn it like that. You can see those lights a little bit there, but that's an extreme angle versus if I'm just looking at the model from this angle, you won't get any hot spots out of it. And I do have to look at one thing because I don't know. It looks like they intend for this to be lit up, these openings, but on the movie, the studio model, these are not lit. These are dark. So I may have to look at some way to light block this so that this isn't lighting up, because that's not how it should be. And even in the later show appearances, these weren't lit up as far as I could tell. So I don't know why they've got this where it's lit up like the Reliant. It's kind of like the Reliant hangar bay doors were lit up, but these weren't lit up like that on the studio model. So I'll have to take a look at some way to light block that or fill that in to where it's not doing that. One other thing I do want to point out, but I probably can't show you while the light's on, so I may have to show you later after I get these lights turned out. But so that's where I'm at with this. I've got these lights set. I've got these lights pretty much set. I've got to do, like I said, two more strobes on the top here, and then I'll be ready to put the board in place, seal that up, and I'll have my wires running out up the pylons, so then that way I can move on to the next section. But once I get the pylons in place, that's probably when I'll start doing the painting, following Gary's guide to paint. So I need to get this done. I need to get this worked out and repainted, and we'll come back and we'll go from there. So give me a little bit, I'll work on that and we'll come back. Alright, so here's where I am at. I have everything wired up in the pontoon section here. And just to kind of go over what I did here, so I've got the control board here, and I'll start from the bottom up. What I've got coming up, what will be coming up from my hollow brass tubing once I put that in, is I've got 3 wires coming up that. And what I've got is, obviously I've got a positive and I've got a negative, which are hooked up right now. And then I've got this blue wire. Now this blue wire is going to go to a switch that's going to let me turn my warp engines on and off. So I'm running that too. So those are the only 3 wires I need to go down to my what will eventually be my mounting base. This is going to work off the ground. That's how I'll turn the warp engines on and off, because I'll just run the positive to everything, just like the board calls for as far as all the lights and that. It was easier since I got to run a positive up to the top anyway. I might as well just run the positive up, and then I only have to run the negative wire to control the warp engine. So that's why I've got it run that way. But those wires come in, my blue wire runs up, and that's already set up to run up the pylon here. And my positive and negative, of course, they go over here to the board, and they're also hooked into the positive connections of all of my nav and my strobe lights on the top part here and on the bottom part. So that's all wired together. And then I've got a little bit of paint, a little bit of my tulip on my wire there. But so everything's run together there, and then I've got another several wires actually spliced into the other wires. So you've got the yellow wire coming off of your control board connects to the negative side of all of your strobes. So you can see all the strobes. You can probably make out the front and back on the right here are flashing. And then we've got the strobe on the belly as well. And what I've done is I've run all that together, and then I've got a separate wire run off of that yellow wire running up the pylon to go up to the top, because then I've got to connect all my strobes and navs in the top. And one thing to mention too, if you haven't noticed, I like to use, some people like to use to labels, and sometimes I will use labels, but what I try to do is I keep some of this rainbow colored ribbon. It's a Hitachi, oh, let me focus here. It's really not important the name. I'll try to put a link for all this. I've had this stuff for a while, so I'll find a link for this, but it's Hitachi ribbon cable. It's a 10 wire cable. It's 15 foot. I've had this stuff for quite a while, and it's lasted me a really long time, but I like to keep some of this because it's got all my different colors. So what I like to do instead of using labels is I will try to use the same wire, which is why you can see there's kind of a spaghetti mess in here, because I use more of some colors than others. But what I'll do is I'll use the same color that the board is calling for, and that way I know when I get this run up top, I'll know yellow is to my strobes and I'll know green is to my navs. And like I said, you can use the labels too, but the problem I had with that was sometimes the labels would fall off and I'd have to figure out which wire was which. This color can't fall off, so if I use the same color wire throughout the build, I know what that wire is for just by the color code. And there's still times where I have to use labels, but for builds like this that are pretty basic and simple, I just use the color coded wires. So obviously red is my positive, black is my negative. I've got to have both of these because remember, I've got to also power that lighting strip, that LED cob strip that's lighting the dome around the bridge section. So I've got to have a positive and negative to run that. And then obviously all my my lights up top, my navs and strobes will connect to the positive only on this. I just need the negative to run that LED cob strip. That's really all I need that for, because all of these are negatives. But these will all blink, so I can't hook the cob strip to these. So I've got to have separate wires for that. So that's why I've got all these wires. I've got 5 wires running up. I've got my warp control. I've got my strobes, my hot wire, my ground wire, and my navigational lights. Those are the 5 wires I've got running up that pylon to be connected to everything up there. So that's how I've pretty much sorted all this out. And then I've got my separate wires run to the lights. Man, is it just me, or is this Oberth have a lot of? It's got a lot of navs and strobes for being such a small ship compared to the Enterprise. It's just there's 3 navs or 3 strobes just on this lower section, and I think we've got 2 more on the upper and lower section of the main hull, and I don't think there's any on the warp nacelles. I gotta look again. If there is, man, that's a lot of strobes. I know there's nav lights on the warp nacelles, but yeah, it's a lot. So as you can see, when I was talking about before with that paint peel, I've stripped this all the way back down, except for these grills, which I'm going to sand a little more because see, I've got a little paint peel on that right there. But I really don't mask this, so I'm not too worried about it. I think this is like the last thing you paint going by Gary's paint instructions. So this doesn't really have to get masked, but I do need to. I've got a couple little spots where the paint's peeled, so I'm going to sand this some more. I got this front section repainted, stripped all the way down and repainted, so hopefully that'll be good to go. I am going to be careful, and I'll talk more about this when I get to the masking set, but I'm going to be real careful to take some of that tackiness off, knowing that this is already peeled before. So, but you can see all my lights are set up. I've got my my forward and rear nav on here. Which doesn't show. Let me turn this light off. Camera doesn't pick up red too well, but you can see them both there, and you can see my green on this side. And like I said, I purposely didn't put that SMD directly over the hole because I wanted to tone it down some. I don't think these, I think if these are too bright, it's kind of out of scale. So I think that looks pretty good like that. You see the one strobe right there. And one thing I do notice is you can see that red and green through this this back funnel here. And I tried to push some tulip down in the between here, but it's such a tight fit I couldn't get it to go all the way down there. So that's the problem. All I have to do, what I'll have to do is put some black primer to black this out so that doesn't show through there. And I think this gets painted a dark color as well anyway, so that's not gonna hurt too much. But I'll get that taken care of. I've got my strobes on the top here as well, the fore and the aft. And basically everything inside, once I got it in place, I went and blacked it out with some tulip, and that's why I don't get too much light leakage. Matter of fact, you can see on the front here where these navs are pretty big for unless you do it right, you're going to get some light leakage there. So what I did was I backed it up with some tulip, let it dry, and then I put this this smooth dome part into place, and you can see I've got no light leakage that you can see from either of those. So that turned out really well. My next step is going to be to get this kind of all, let me flip this over, get this all sealed up. I've got quite a bit of work to do. I've got a seam on the front here and a seam in the back since this popped back open that I've got to fix, and I've got to get this repainted with white once I get the seam taken care of. There's going to be a seam, not too bad of a seam, and you see I've got these just to make sure you know, I did make sure I lined this up with the pylon to make sure all these wires were going to sit in this groove. You've got this groove in here for these wires to sit in, and they do sit perfectly right in that groove, and they'll run up, and I can put the top on and it'll sit well in there. I won't have to worry about it bulging or anything like that. So I did get that settled down, and but my next step is going to get this all together. Just to go over real quick, in case you're wondering what lighting I used, I get all my stuff from Amazon because I have a Prime account, so it's just really easy to go on there, find stuff, and it gets shipped to me for free. So but I use this Edgelic, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but this Edgelic brand, and I use a what are these? These are 0402 SMDs, and I keep them in green, white, and red, and I've even got some of these in like a blinking that are self-blinking and stuff like that. I've got RGB ones that blink different colors. I like to keep a bunch of these in stock. They're and they're not expensive at all. This is 20 pieces that come in each one, and they're real cheap. They're real inexpensive. Some people use different size SMDs. I don't worry about. I think this is the smallest you can go. I don't worry about going any bigger because everything I've lit, these have always worked out just fine for the scale that I'm building at. So I've always used these, and I always use the 470 ohm resistors. I just get a big pack of these. I mean, it's 100 of them. Oh, too far out. It's 100 of them. 470 ohm is usually pretty good for either 9 or 12 volt for your SMDs and your LEDs. So that's really all I've ever used was this brand and this gauge of resistor, this ohm set of resistor. So you know, do what you want with that, but it's always worked for me, and that's what I go by. And for the cob lighting, oh, let me get the package for this. This is HAMRVL is the brand, and this, you'll find this in different names. It's basically the same stuff, just some other seller has put their brand name on it. But this comes in a 6K and a 4K white, and I've got it in both. I use the 6K in this. I probably could have gone with the 4K. It's a little bit less of a bright white, but these have worked out fine for this. If I build this again, I'll probably use the 4K. So just keep that in mind if you do want to get some of this. Again, I got this off Amazon, I believe. It's a cob lighting. You don't get as bad of hot spots with this stuff as you do regular LED strip lighting. So again, I'll put that in the notes. And I think that's it as far as lighting that I've used on this. Of course, I've mentioned I've used the Tenda Controls control board. The blink rate for the strobes is a little bit faster. It's more time to the motion picture refit. So just keep that in mind if you do get this board. If you're real picky about it being the same strobe rate as what the Grissom was on screen, then you may want to go with, that's probably one of the differences with the other, the actual board that you get from Tenda that's actually made for the Grissom. It's probably got a different blink rate to it. But again, I wanted my navs to blink, so I went with this board. It's cheaper and you get more effects out of it. So real happy with it. And I think that's pretty much it on lighting. I think I've covered what I've done so far. I mean, I'm going to get ready to start working on these warp grills, the chiller grills here. So hopefully next video we'll be talking about these. And next video we should be ready to start on Gary's mask set from Mask Design for this and start getting some of that done. Once I get this sealed up, then I can start painting this bottom half. And then once I get that top on, I can start working on that. But I just want to make sure that I get these seams taken care of as they need to be before I start working on any of that painting. But so anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this episode. I think I've been kind of long-winded the last segment and this one. So hopefully this information has been useful. Again, as always, if you've gotten use out of this information, please, if you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing. You know, I just want to say that a lot of content creators like myself, Boyd, Wayne over at World of Wayne, and Lou, and all those guys, everybody that puts out content, you know, for the most part, the way we make money to kind of do this stuff, because it's not free for us. We do pay for some of this stuff at least, and it costs money to create content. And if you want to support us, please click that subscribe link, watch our videos. That's the best way to support any of the content creators on YouTube, is just watching the videos. I don't do a Patreon page because it takes some more commitment than what I'm willing to put into it, and I don't sell stuff on Amazon or that. So all this stuff that I've shown you, I don't get any money off of that. I don't have any agreements with whoever sells that stuff. It's just I like it, I use it, so I'm going to recommend it. But again, guys, thank you for watching. If you don't want to subscribe, you don't have to, but please, as always, click that like button. Let me know if you got any use out of this information. Next episode, we'll get more into, we'll have this sealed up and get more into Gary's mask, like I said, and hopefully be working on these warp chiller grills and see what we're going to do with those. But until next time, keep modeling.